Today we are going to continue our Rookie Spotlight series and talk about another player who is always destined to play in the NFL. At one point he was considered a 5-star recruit, was supposed to be the next great wide receiver at Alabama, and then despite falling off and things not going according to plan, found a way to bounce back at a smaller school and get his way to the NFL. He is now a rookie for the New England Patriots, and Javon Baker has a ton of potential with them and I think could be one of the steals of the draft. In today's video we're going to talk about him. We're going to go through how he became a blue chip recruit, talk about his time at Bama and why it didn't work out, how he almost went to Kentucky, how he did at UCF, and then ultimately how he's going to fit with the Patriots. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and talk about the insane rise of Javon Baker. In order to understand how Baker got to this point, we first need to go back in time. He ended up growing up in the city of Powder Springs, Georgia, and was apparently always a freak athlete who was next up when he got to the high school level. Honestly, whenever I do videos, I can find research, and there's pretty much no player where I can't find details on, but Javon Baker was absolutely impossible to find stuff on, so I don't know much about his early years or his upbringing, but apparently he was just a good athlete. Eventually, when Franklin Stevens took over the head coaching job at McEachern High School, he knew he had a lot of talent, but I don't think he knew how good of a player Baker was. His roster included some blue chip players. Former 4-star quarterback Carlos Del Rio Wilson, Michigan State running back Jordan Simmons, and Clemson wide receiver Dakari Collins. That was alongside Baker, and upon taking the job, Stevens remembered hearing stories about a 6'2", 195-pound receiver who had torn apart recruiting camps in 7-on-7 events. It didn't take long for Baker to introduce his skill set in person, and everybody was wowed by him. Coach Stevens said, quote, "The first time I saw him do something that surprised me was during spring practice. He was running a post and I saw him throw his hand up like a baseball player. I had no idea what he was doing. He was shielding the sun with his eyes, and at the last second he made the catch, and it's all been history from there." On a very stacked team, he ended up standing out. Baker had 1,100 yards and 8 touchdowns his junior year and ended up earning the MVP honors at the opening regionals in Atlanta. That's a pretty big deal. From there, he got offers from nearly every school in the country, but he quickly knew where he wanted to go. He decided to commit to Alabama. In 2018, he spent time at Bama over the summer, and that is where he earned his first offer. He camped in Tuscaloosa, and he worked with the coaching staff and saw the demands that they put on the players. This is when his interest in the Crimson Tide started. Baker said, quote, "It feels great to be committed to Alabama. I've been thinking about Bama since I was at camp, and I got the offer, and they have been a school high on my list ever since. I do not like for things to come easy, and I know it'll take hard work for me to work out at Bama." One beat writer said, quote, "I've been watching Baker since his junior year at McEachern, and 3 things about him pop out. His work ethic is second to none, and Javon Baker will outwork anyone. His route running ability is elite for an incoming freshman, and lastly, his hands are amazing." But Baker was not satisfied, and he felt he needed to improve, and he did. He said he'd been working on his yards after catch and being more physical with the ball, and also to tuck it in right away, he said. He eventually became the top-ranked receiver in the state of Georgia, and he had long been committed to Bama, yet during a visit to Athens, he ended up adding an offer from the in-state Georgia Bulldogs, which many thought could change the trajectory of his recruitment. His head coach said, quote, "The team started working, and I was talking with Coach Kirby Smart and Coach Hankton. They told me they had talked and said, 'Congratulations, you've earned a scholarship for the University of Georgia,' and they said I could play both inside and outside." At the time, Baker was 6'2" and nearly 200 pounds, and got a question from the Georgia coaching staff, and Baker was quick to respond with this. The coach said, quote, "Are we too late?" And he said, "No, nobody is too late." At this point, no one knew where Javon Baker was going to go. It was a very relevant question to the borderline 5-star player, and he admitted it was something he had wondered about himself. It felt great knowing he had been working since his 9th grade year, and he was just wondering why they had waited so long to offer. But, as I said, he kept his considerations open, and he said, "Yeah, Georgia's in consideration, and every offer I have is still in contention." Eventually, there were a group of teams that were trying to flip him, as Ohio State, LSU, Georgia, and Georgia Tech made a late push to try to secure his talents. He was considered the best route runner in the class of 2020 and would train alongside NFL wideouts such as Mecole Hardman and Calvin Ridley as he would try to perfect his ability to be an efficient route runner. Eventually, he went on to record a 58 reception, 629 yard, and 11 touchdown senior season, and while his numbers were a bit down, the hype was still through the roof. There was a chance that Bama was going to lose their top 3 wideouts at the end of the 2019 season, so the door was going to be wide open for a freshman or a backup to make an instant impact, and luckily, he was highly rated. Despite all those schools trying to flip him, none were able to do so, and Javon Baker decided to sign with Alabama. According to 24/7 Sports, he was a 4-star recruit, the number 35 wide receiver, and the 203rd best player in the class of 2020. So, how would he end up doing in Tuscaloosa? Well, let's take a look. So when Baker arrived at Alabama in 2020, all the conversations coming out of Bama's fall camp pointed towards Baker being right in the thick of things when it came to playing time at the wide receiver position. Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle were expected to be the two featured wideouts for the Tide, but there was room for a couple of other guys to make noise. Many thought that John Mechie III would take that third spot, and Slade Bolden would probably go in at 4. Baker was expected to see the most playing time amongst all the other freshman wideouts for the Tide. It was very possible, as at the time Bama was becoming an absolute factory in terms of the wide receiver position, and then a few weeks into the year, things got really interesting. College football lost its most dynamic and entertaining playmaker in the country, as against Tennessee, Jalen Waddle would hurt his ankle and he was out for the remainder of the 2020 season. Many thought that Bama was about to witness another moment of Nick Saban's recruiting genius, as it looked like Javon Baker could slide in and take that role. But it did not happen. Instead, it was John Mechie, and Baker really didn't get a chance to do much. He literally only appeared in one game, catching 2 passes for 15 yards against Arkansas. Alabama had an insane offense in 2020 and ended up winning the national championship, but Baker really didn't do much in the process. He decided to return in 2021, and his role would not really increase at all. He'd appear in their game against number 14 Miami and would catch 3 passes for 21 yards. He'd end up catching 2 passes for 59 yards and his first career touchdown, and then he had 2 catches against New Mexico State in November. He ended up finishing the 2021 season with just 7 catches for 101 yards and a touchdown, and this was very disappointing. Instead of him stepping up, Jamison Williams, the Ohio State transfer, became a superstar, and John Mechie also became that top option. Even though there were injuries late in the year to the Crimson Tide room, Javon Baker was passed up, and it was time for him to move on. In 2 years in Tuscaloosa, he appeared in 21 games with no starts and just caught 9 passes for 116 yards and a touchdown. Alabama had always been consistently loaded at the receiver spot, which did not allow him to have much opportunity to get in games, and I guess they just didn't exactly see it. When he decided to enter the transfer portal, many thought that he'd get plenty of opportunities and big-time schools to entertain him. He ended up quickly getting connected to Kentucky, and he decided to commit to the Wildcats. This was still a big deal, so both him and Virginia Tech transfer Tavion Robinson were supposed to have huge years, and he would be alongside Will Levis, who was a really good quarterback. But then things completely fell apart again. For some unknown reason, he just ended up not going there. I don't know what happened, but things fell through, and he eventually decided to go to UCF. At the time, the Knights were a Group of 5 school instead of a Big 12 program, so Javon had went from arguably the most prestigious school in college football at the time to now playing Group of 5 football. It definitely had to be humbling, but he would be with head coach Gus Malzahn, and he'd have an opportunity to play right away. Luckily, things actually went really well for Baker, as in 2022, he immediately caught fire. He caught 5 passes for 84 yards and a touchdown against South Carolina State, and then had the exact same stat line against Louisville. He had 7 catches for 83 yards and a touchdown against FAU, and then had his monster breakout performance against SMU. In that game in early October, he caught 6 passes for 138 yards and showed that he could be the number 1 option for them. After that, he finished the year strong, as he had 7 catches in a win over number 20 Cincinnati, a touchdown against Memphis, a touchdown in a win over number 17 Tulane, a touchdown against Navy, and then 3 catches in a win over USF. He'd helped them go to the American Athletic Conference Championship game, where he'd catch 4 passes in a loss to Tulane, and then he caught 2 passes in their loss to Duke in the Military Bowl. In total in 2022, he ended up catching 56 passes for 796 yards and 5 touchdowns. It looked like Javon Baker was a popular pick to break out in 2023, and that is exactly what he would do. He caught 4 passes for 59 yards in their Week 1 game against Kent State, caught 4 more passes against Boise State, and then had his first touchdown of the season against Villanova. He was limited in their first Big 12 game against Kansas State, but then he started going off in conference play. There were 4 particular games in which he went really nuts, and the first one was against Baylor, as while they lost by 1 point, he caught 3 passes for 113 yards and a touchdown. A few weeks later against Oklahoma, he almost single-handedly beat the Sooners, as he caught 5 passes for 134 yards and 2 touchdowns in their near upset over the number 6 ranked Sooners. After that, he had a touchdown against West Virginia, and then caught 4 passes for 112 yards in a win over number 15 Oklahoma State. To say that was a win is an understatement. They dominated 45-3. To close out the rest of his career, he'd go over the 100-yard mark against Texas Tech with a touchdown, caught 2 passes for 59 yards in the win over Houston, and then would play in his final game against Georgia Tech. He ended up saving the best for last, as he had a career game. He ended up catching a career-high 9 passes for a career-high 173 yards and then a touchdown. Baker was a certified college football star, and in total, he caught 52 passes for 1,139 yards and 7 total touchdowns. He became an integral part of the Golden Knights' passing attack, as during his 2 years, he caught 100 passes for nearly 2,000 yards and 12 touchdowns. He became one of the best wide receivers in the Big 12 and in college football, and decided that he was going to declare for the 2024 NFL Draft. While things didn't work out at Bama, he pretty much ended up living up to his recruiting hype. According to NFL Mock Database, Baker was a projected 3rd-round pick and the 89th overall prospect with a 3% chance of going in the 1st round. Well, he was considered a prospect that checked a lot of boxes. One scout said, quote, "Javon Baker is a big play receiver with decent size, and he is good at using route running moves to get open. He has great body control, tracking ability, and is great at making catches in contested situations." Eventually, he was drafted with the 110th overall pick in the 4th round by the New England Patriots, and while to many that would be awesome, Baker was not too happy. He was not smiling as he went on Instagram Live, and he wasn't mad because the Patriots drafted him, and not because he wasn't excited to get started in the NFL, but because, quote, "it just took too long." He thought he deserved to go a lot higher. I can't blame him for having that mindset. He was projected as a fringe day 2 pick, but was ended up drafting in the 4th round. He definitely ended up slipping a bit, as he'd end up being the 17th wide receiver taken off the board, and now he will have a chip on his shoulder. Baker said this about his mentality, quote, "It's just to kill whoever's on the other side of me. That's really my mentality. Just to come to your stadium and bring your popcorn. That's all I can tell you. Bring your popcorn. I make people in the wheelchairs stand up. Bring your popcorn." Well, that's not quite the verbiage I would use. I have to applaud the guy's passion, and that's why I think he's a steal. Not only should he have gone higher in the draft, but I think he has the right mentality, and he pretty much checks all the boxes for me. To me, physically, he's going to be a good wide receiver. 2, he had the production in college. 3, he has the mentality. And 4, I think he went through the process. He went from a guy who was told he was the best thing ever to then getting completely humbled at Bama. I mean, the guy caught 9 total passes in 2 years at Bama and had to go down to a school that was not in the Power 5 at the time. He had to deal with a lot of hardship, and he probably had to face a lot of things mentally, and that makes him a very strong prospect and probably a pretty strong person in my eyes. He'll get a chance to play right away with the Patriots, as they definitely had a need at the wide receiver spot. They ended up investing in 2 prospects. Javon Baker is now their guy. He's supposed to be a future weapon for Drake May, and as Gerard Mayo is trying to build something in Foxborough, I think Baker's going to have an opportunity to play right away, and I would guess he's probably going to have about 25 catches for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns as a rookie. Maybe he won't be a superstar, but I think he's going to be pretty solid, and he's a guy who will only get better in time. But what do you guys think? If you're a UCF or a Bama fan, what do you think of Javon Baker? If you're a Patriots fan, what do you think of Baker? And what other rookie should I cover next? Be sure to let me know down below. Leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.